Here we are for lesson 3 of Should Christians Go to War? Right, talking about the early Christian disapproval of war. And so we remember what we talked about last night, right? A brief review. The evidence shows us that Jesus was a peaceful and gentle man. We don't have any evidence to the contrary, right? Oh, he told someone to buy a sword. Well, that's to fulfill a prophecy. Oh, he made a whip of cords. Well, that was for the sheep and for the cows, not for the people. So there's nothing in there that we see that Jesus didn't live this non-violent life. He didn't use violence of any kind. He taught his disciples to follow those same principles of love, those same principles of non-resistance for everybody. Love your neighbor. Not hate your enemy, but love your enemy. That's a big difference. We talked about a lot of objections. I just mentioned 2 main ones. And those can all be explained without getting away from the basic understanding of what Jesus was teaching. So tonight we're going to see, okay, if that's our conclusion from the teaching of Jesus, did the early disciples have that same conclusion? Did they know something that we don't know? Let's see how they lived and what they taught for the first 300 years of Christianity. Okay? So, if we go back to the New Testament again, just like Jesus didn't say anything directly about you should fight in a war or you shouldn't fight in a war, the authors of the New Testament aren't dealing with that either. We don't see Paul writing to the church in Corinth and saying, why are you guys not signing up for the army? Or why are you guys doing that? You shouldn't be fighting. Because again, it was a very peaceful time for the most part. The issues that the church was having were moral issues more than anything else. Some doctrinal issues. But even through the letters, we see these same statements of Jesus reiterated. And things like, don't repay evil with evil. Don't be overcome by evil. Overcome evil with good. We're going to look at some of those today, right? And references to peace and such. There are some references to wars, battles, right? But it's things warring against your soul. It's warring against our desires. Or it's in Revelation. There's a lot of war. There's a lot of violence in there. But we have to be very careful about taking Revelation literally and how we apply it. And who's the one making war? A lot of the war in Revelation is being made against the Christians, and they're the ones being killed. So mostly it's just about other kinds of strife and conflict, but not actually fighting in a war. So our study tonight is going to start out looking at just this general condemnation of war that the early Christians had. So if we start with Aristides in 125 AD. Here he is in the city of Athens. He was a Greek philosopher that had become a Christian. And he's talking about the Greeks and their past. He says, if their gods did such things, why should they themselves not do them? Are you familiar with the myths of the Greeks? Story of Homer, the Odyssey, the Iliad, their different plays. The Greek gods were not models of virtue. They were doing terrible things. They were killing each other. They were lusting and doing all sorts of things. They were drunken, and all the worst characteristics of humankind could be seen in the gods of the Greeks, right? And so Aristides is saying, look, if their gods were like that, why wouldn't they be like that? But from the pursuit of error, it has fallen to men's lot to have continual wars and massacres and bitter captivity, right? They were following false gods. Those false gods led them into these same kinds of terrible things. He talks about Ares and Heracles. You might be more familiar with Hercules, right? That's the Roman name for Heracles. But they were very warlike. And Aristides is saying, that's not good. That's not a kind of character that we ought to have. We fast forward about 25 years to Justin Martyr. He was another Greek philosopher. He wrote some apologies to the emperor explaining about Christianity. He wrote to some Jews explaining the difference between Christianity and Judaism. And he talks about the evil angels and demons that sowed murders, wars, adulteries, excesses, and every wickedness among men. Where do all these things come from? Well, we could say they come from our own desire, yeah. But how are those desires inflamed? Oftentimes by the evil powers, angels, demons that are around that we don't see. If you look through the early Christian teachings and you look at the Apostle Paul, what did he say? These things that they're offering, they're idols. An idol is nothing, but they're really demons behind that. Do they have miraculous power sometimes? Yes. Do they have some prophecy? Yes. But that's a demonic power. And so we shouldn't be associated with that. And so we can see that happening throughout history, not just in the time of the Greeks, but go back to the Assyrians or the Babylonians. They're all praising their gods and celebrating these massacres. And you might say, well, there's some in the Old Testament. We'll talk about that later. Then we fast forward another 25 years to Athenagoras. He saw unjust war as the worst of sins. Because what happens in an unjust war? Myriads of people, hundreds and thousands of people are slaughtered. Cities are burned to the ground. Houses, their inhabitants, all these things destroyed. The land is devastated. Trees are cut down. Fields are destroyed. Farming is ruined. Whole populations might be wiped out. Is that good? Can we think that's good? I gave the example last night, World War II with the atomic bomb, dropping it on this town. The whole town is just destroyed. Right? That's not a good thing. Well, it was necessary. Was it necessary? That's a big debate. Right? But I don't think you could say it was a good thing. Athenagoras says, all these things that happen in war, they're so bad, there's no way to punish that during this life. There's no amount of suffering that you could inflict back upon the person. You couldn't get Hitler and say, okay, I'm going to pay you back for all the Jews that you killed. I'm going to pay you back for all the gypsies and all the blacks and all the people all around the world that you led a war against. We're going to pay you back for that. He's never going to be able to pay it back, right? Not in this life. And so Athenagoras says Christians cannot endure to see a man put to death, even justly. You have some criminal that's murdered these people, raped them, done all these terrible things. What should happen to that guy? Well, he deserves to die. I'm not going to watch it happen. I don't want to see him die. Does God take pleasure in the death of the wicked? No. Should we? Absolutely not. And so this was the sentiment in that first 150 years after Jesus left the earth. Then we go forward another 25 years to Tertullian. He's talking about Peter in Malchus's ear, and we're going to come back to this a bit later. He says, Jesus cursed the works of the sword forever after, when he took that sword away from Peter. He looks at the Gentiles, at the nations. He says, you guys are getting into military service. Why? Because you want money. Because you're greedy. You want gold. You want fame. If I do this, I can go get this big plot of land. I can get this. I can get all these honors. That's no good. Go forward 50 years to Cyprian. He speaks about the bloody horror of war. The world is wet with mutual bloodshed. And homicide is a crime when individuals commit it. But it's called a virtue when it's carried on publicly. Not the reason of innocence, but the magnitude of savagery demands impunity for crimes. Think about that. You kill one person, oh, you're a murderer. We're going to execute you or throw you in jail for life. You're stained, you're tainted. But if a general kills 1,000 of his enemies, 10,000, 100,000, wow, he's a hero. But a lot more people died. That's not better, right? It's so much worse, but it's so bad. There's this, call it cognitive dissonance. your brain doesn't want to put those two things together, right? It's got to mean something else, right? So we honor that guy. Say that it was good. We go forward to 250 AD to the Didaskalia. It forbids taking money from the church for any of the magistrates of the Roman Empire who are polluted by war. All right, so you've got church funds, but there's a judge over here. You can't provide anything for him from the church if he's been polluted by war. If he's been doing these terrible things, you can't support him. We're going to look at some things later on about judges and soldiers and how they were denied entry into the church. Go forward another 50 years to Arnobius. He says, forgetting that they are from one source, one parent and head, that men should tear up and break down the rights of kinship, overturn their cities, devastate lands in enmity, make slaves of free men, violate maidens and other men's wives, hate one another, envy the joys and good fortune of others. In a word, all curse, complain about, and rend one another with the biting of savage teeth. It's kind of poetic, but terrible. Think about that. Where do we all come from? Aren't we all brothers? Oh, you're not my brother, you're not my neighbor. Cousins? How many generations do we have to go back before we're all related? Shouldn't that mean something? But we're going to tear all that apart. We're going to destroy the land even. The land didn't do anything. Make people into slaves. Violate the women. And that didn't stop. You don't have to go back very far. You know, that was a big problem in World War II. That was a problem in Korea. It was a problem in Vietnam. It's a problem in every place where there's a war. Every place where there's violent men going in somewhere. Things happen that shouldn't happen. Go forward a little bit further to Lactantius. This is just around the time of Constantine. Right, the great emperor who made Christianity a legal option for the religions of people. He says about the Romans, if anyone has slain a single man, he's regarded as contaminated and wicked. Nor do they think it right that he should be admitted to this earthly dwelling of the gods. Right? So if you're a murderer, don't be coming to church. Don't be coming to the temple. You're defiled. You're not welcome here. This is a holy place. But he says, those who've slaughtered endless thousands of men, flooded the fields with blood, infected the rivers with it, he's admitted not only to a temple, but even to heaven. These great generals, right? Pompey, Julius Caesar, Titus, Vespasian, Marcus Aurelius. What did they do? They killed tens of thousands of people. Well, you must be a god then. Right? You know, when we think about heaven, we think about, oh, we're going to go and be with God. You know, we're not gods, but this is where God lives. But remember, for the Greeks and the Romans, when you died, you didn't go to heaven, you went to Hades. Right? The way you got to heaven was to be deified, glorified. Right? But again, how come if I kill one guy, it's bad? But if I kill 10,000, I'm a god. What? No, not at all. You're a terrible murderer. He criticizes the defining of virtue as putting your country first. Right? If you say, oh, that's, you know, what can I do for my country? Famous quote by John F. Kennedy. Right? Ask not what my country you can do for your country, but what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Now, it's great to do something for your country. Fine. But if you put your country ahead of everything, that's a problem. He points out when you do that, then one of the things you want to do is, well, it'd be better if our country was bigger. if we had that land over there? And that encroaches on those neighboring states. I'll pick on my own country, the U.S. We started as 13 colonies. Where do we get that from? Well, we took it or bought it from some Native Americans. And then we just kept moving west and invading, killing. And you might say, well, they were killing us first. Well, yes, they were. Everybody was killing everybody. It was a terrible time, right? Was that the Christian thing to do? I don't think so, right? Have a hard time reconciling those things. Like Tantius says, all these things are certainly not virtues. They're the overthrowing of virtues. For in the first place, the connection of human society is taken away. Okay, we're all together in this. Innocence is taken away. Abstention from what is another's is taken away, right? That's theirs, not mine. I can't just take it from them because I want it or because it's good for my country. That's not innocent. It's all backwards. He says, in fact, justice itself is taken away, for justice cannot bear the cutting apart of the human race. And wherever arms glitter, she must be put to flight and banished, for how can he be just who injures, who hates, and despoils and kills? And those who strive to be of advantage to their country do all these things. Now again, you could be of advantage to your country without doing that. And there's a lot of ways you can help the people around you, help your country. But if you've really got a country first mindset, a lot of times, at all costs, then you get your priorities out of order. So clearly then, early Christians had a very strong dislike and disapproval of war. Right? We went from 125 all the way to 310. So now we turn to the essential peacefulness of Christianity, because warfare and murder are very closely connected in the Christian mind. But on the other hand, we have peace. But peace can mean a number of different things, right? We could have peace with God. We've been reconciled to God. We've been free from our sins. We have a relationship that's been restored. We could have an end to the passions and evil desires in our own heart. I have peace in my heart. I'm not ruled by all these temptations anymore. And we've got harmony and agreement between us and the Christian community, right? And do we always agree about everything? No, but in general, harmony is what we have. There's peace. We work out our differences, right? We work through our conflicts in a Christian way. And the reconciliation of the Jew and the Gentile, right? God's people with the people from the nations that God brought into his family. Or protection from annoyance and persecution by the pagans, right? All these people out there bothering us. We would like peace from that. We wouldn't like to be persecuted, right? Sometimes we are going to be persecuted and we're going to have to fall back on that peace from God in our hearts, right? But that's peace. And then there's freedom from the distractions, toils, and dangers of actual war, right? Let's not have war. Let's have peace. Because whenever there's a war going on, some of these other ones get a little more difficult. Now, when we look at peace throughout this time, peace is, again, it's essential to Christianity, right? It runs all through it, and it's used in a lot of different ways, and oftentimes not talking about military service at all. But Christianity is so closely tied to peace. Peace is the opposite of war, right? So, of course, if we're always thinking about how peaceful it is in Christianity and how much this peace that we have and how we're peaceful people, how we're peacemakers, then we're going to be opposed to war. Paul tells the Romans, if possible, as far as you are concerned, be at peace with all men. It's a powerful verse. Now, what if somebody attacks you? Well, we're not at peace, right? It's not my fault. But now the question is, what do I do in that situation? Do I try to get us back to peace? Or do I repay evil with evil? Right? To some people, the answer to that's not so obvious. But I think we know where this is going. The author of Hebrews writes, pursue peace with all men. Chase after it. Go after peace. Matthew quotes the words of Jesus, happy are the peacemakers. They'll be sons of God. When Luke is telling us the story of the birth of Jesus, and the angels come down and visit the shepherds, they sing glory in the highest to God, and on earth peace among men whom he favors. And Zacharias, father of John the Baptist, prayed to God to guide our feet in the way of peace. That's what was coming into the world. So when we get to 100 AD, Clement of Rome, one of the elders there, the Church of Rome at that time, he prays for the rulers of the world. He says, give them, Lord, health, peace, concord, stability, that they may administer without offense the government given to them by you, Lord. Direct their counsel, in order that they, administering piously with peace and gentleness the authority you gave them, may find favor with you. So he's recognizing the authority of the governors, of the emperors, of the magistrates, of these different guys in charge. They have authority from God. But what is he praying for? God, let them use it well. Let them use it rightly, without offense, so that there will be peace and gentleness. We go forward to Ignatius. Most people date Ignatius to around 115 AD. Some of us like to date it around 210 instead. But either way, he says, nothing is better than peace, by which all war of those in heaven and those on earth is abolished. All right, that's what we want. That's what Christianity is all about. There's nothing better. Justin, again, 150, told the emperors, Christians are your best allies. They're your best helpers in promoting peace. Right, again, he's trying to defend Christianity to the emperors. They've heard all these things about what Christians are doing, this and that, and he's saying, no, you need to understand something about us. Because we believe in a future punishment. We believe that God knows everything. You can't hide anything from him. And so that is what keeps us from doing wrong. Right? Because we know God is always watching. You can't hide it. Right? You can't be like, well, no one saw me do it. So you're not going to do what's wrong. Because the law is great, but people break the law all the time when they think they can get away with it. But if you know you can't get away with it, you're not going to do it. Go back to Micah chapter 4 and Isaiah chapter 2 and 3. This prophecy was there, and many peoples shall go and say, come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and he shall judge among the nations, and convict many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning knives. Nation shall not lift sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Great prophecy. The church believed it was the fulfillment of this prophecy. It said, what other law went out from Jerusalem that brought peace into the whole world except the gospel of Christ? This is quoted by Justin, by Irenaeus, by Tertullian, by Origen, by Eusebius in like 345, by many, many others. They're all quoting this verse and saying, look, the church fulfills this. Clement of Alexandria says, we are being educated not in war, but in peace. Right? We can think about the Israelites. When God brought them into the land of Canaan, he gave them that nation, and they had to drive out the Canaanites and do these things. There's a verse in there that says that God left some of these people behind to teach them war. But again, Why? Well, that was their land. They hadn't taken it over yet. They had to go through these things to lead them up until the time of Christ. And then that law became old and obsolete, and the new covenant came in. Go to 300 AD again to Arnobius. He tells the pagans, wars have diminished since Christ came. We already talked about how peaceful it was in Jesus' day. But there was still conflict. But he's saying, look, wars are less. He says, for since we, so large a force of men, have received from his teachings and laws that evil ought not to be repaid with evil, that it is better to endure a wrong than to inflict one, to shed one's own blood rather than stain one's hands and conscience with the blood of another. The ungrateful world has long been receiving a benefit from Christ, through whom the madness of savagery has been softened and has begun to withhold its hostile hands from the blood of a kindred creature. Right? There's been so many of us that have become Christians, we've realized this has to stop. We can't treat each other like this anymore. Now, of course, not everybody was a Christian. How many were there? 10%? I don't know. It's hard to say. God knows. But it was having a major difference on the world. Now, some argue that the people making these statements didn't have any political responsibility. You're just a minority group. You're slaves, you're priests, you're guys on the fringes. You're not taking responsibility for society. No, they were taking care of each other. There was a scholar named Lecky who says the opinions of the Christians of the first 3 centuries were usually formed without any regard to the necessities of civil or political life. But when the church obtained an ascendancy, it was found necessarily to speedily modify them. So again, once the church got into power, then, well, we have to take the responsibilities of power, right? We have to do these things. We have to fight these wars. We have to be the police. We have to throw people in jail. We have to execute people. Because that's what the church has to do, now that it's in charge. Well, is the church supposed to be in charge that way? Right? Is that how it was really supposed to happen? Were those people that were doing that, were they really Christians? Well, they had faith, maybe. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But think about the principles of Christianity. Those actually give us a better solution to the problems of the world. Right? Just like he said a minute ago, we've given up that way of life. Now what you had in the 4th century, 5th century going on is you had this big inrush of people calling themselves Christians, officially being Christians, because that was the official religion of the empire. But were they acting like Christians? I don't know. Not all of them. Were they devoted to Christ? Or were they doing it just because, well, that's what you have to do now? It's the law. Right? Nobody wants to follow those old gods. They got defeated. We'll follow the new gods. The changes that happened in the church after Constantine, if we analyze them, they're largely because this early moral purity that they had was just relaxed. They just said, well, we don't have to do that anymore. Right? Persecution had been a fire, right? Because if you weren't really committed, you weren't going to stick around. Right? If there's a chance that as a Christian you're going to get drug away, all your stuff confiscated, you're put to death or imprisoned, you're probably not going to stick around being a Christian if you don't really believe it. You're going to say, no, here, I'll put the incense to Caesar. I'll go back about my business. But if there's no consequences like that, and no one's holding you accountable if you're not following Christian principles, then what does it matter? Right? If you can come to church once a year and, make your confession or do whatever it is you need to do, and then you can go about your life the rest of the time, well then, why would you follow all these things? You wouldn't. But we saw for the first 300 years, it was very much associated with peace, and even afterwards. But things were starting to change. Now we can talk about the Christian treatment of enemies and wrongdoers. All right? Christians had enemies. What did they do with them? Well, they obeyed Jesus' teachings about love and non-resistance in a very close and literal way. Now, not everyone. As we'll see, there's going to be some examples here of people going astray. Even in the New Testament, why were the letters written? Well, because Christians weren't doing what they were supposed to do. They were doing what was wrong, and they needed to be corrected. There's always a need to be corrected, but what are we being corrected towards? Always back to the teaching of Jesus. And so, as a whole, the church refused to take criminals and other wrongdoers to court. Right? He stole something from me. Well, I just give it to him. Right? Oh, he hit me. I'm not going to press charges. I'll let him hit me again if he wants. It sounds crazy, but that's what Jesus said, isn't it? And they wouldn't participate in warfare. So that shows us that Jesus' teachings were not just for a perfect society. Okay? These people were persecuted. It was definitely not a perfect society, but they were sticking to the rules. And it wasn't just about the spirit. Oh, we'll follow the spirit of what Jesus said, but we don't have to follow the words exactly. No, they really did it. Love your enemies. It's about our actions also. And it applies to private life and public life. And it's not just about not returning an insult because somebody slapped me, right? But I don't even want to watch a man be executed because people shouldn't be killed. The simple-minded Christians, you might call them. But they did more for the moral purification of the world that they lived in than anybody before or since. They changed society. And so maybe their principles that they were following aren't quite so foolish as sometimes we might think, or how they might sound. God uses the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom. Paul writes, "May the Lord make you to increase and abound in love toward one another and towards all. See that no one repays to anyone evil in return for evil, but always pursue what is good towards one another and towards all." By the way, the verse references are in the outline if you want to get it. Don't repay anyone evil for evil. Again, is that just a personal thing? Or is that in every situation? Always pursue what is good toward one another and toward all. Well, man, always. Wow. He wrote to the Galatians, "When we have opportunity, let us work that which is good toward all, especially those of the household of faith." He wrote to the Corinthians, "What business of it of mine to judge those outside?" Outsiders, God is going to judge them. So again, if we're called to war by our country, should we go? Those guys are the bad guys. We got to go get them. That's not my call. Right? God will judge them maybe, but not by my hand, because he told me to do something else. To the Romans, he says, "Repay no one evil for evil. If possible, as far as it lies in your power, be at peace with all men. Do not avenge yourselves, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord." So if someone says something terrible to you, what should you do about it? Not seek vengeance. You leave that to God. Just like Jesus, when he was threatened, he didn't retaliate. He entrusted it to God. Paul writes, "If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him drink. For by doing this, you'll heap coals of fire on his head. Be not conquered by evil, but conquer evil with what is good. Owe no man anything, except mutual love. For he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. For the command, you'll not commit adultery, you'll not kill, you'll not steal, you'll not covet, whatever other commandment there is summed up by this statement: you love your neighbor as yourself. Love does not work evil on a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. And again, someone might say, well, that's not my neighbor, they're my enemy. Well, guess what? Jesus said, you heard, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemy. So you can't get away from it, right? Paul wrote to Timothy, the servant of God ought not to fight, but to be mild to all, a skilled teacher, patient of evil, gently correcting his opponents. God may possibly give them repentance, leading to a knowledge of the truth, and they may become sober again, out of the snare of the devil. Some will say, well, this isn't talking about violence, it's talking about don't quarrel with one another. It could be. But do any of these things not apply to our enemy? Or we could say, well, we shouldn't fight, but it's okay to kill that guy over there. What? No. That escalated quickly, don't you think? Can't God possibly grant them repentance if I don't kill them? But if I kill them, they're gone. That kind of violence is not acceptable. Paul wrote to Titus, remind them, be ready for every good work. Slander no one, to not be fighting, to be reasonable, displaying all gentleness toward all men. All gentleness toward all men. Not some gentleness toward some men. Or most gentleness to most men. Right? But all gentleness to all men. Those are all the writings of Paul. Peter says, honor all men. And then later, for unto you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example, in order that you might follow in his footsteps. Who, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to him who judges justly, righteously. That's our example, right? We talked about Jesus in the moment, there with Peter, and we said, well, he's got to do that. He's got to fulfill this thing. Otherwise, the plan won't work, right? If he doesn't give his life, then we're all going to die in our sins. Okay? But how does that change us, right? We get an exception, right? I can fight to save myself or kill somebody else. Why? Shouldn't I give my life so that they have a chance? I mean, because Jesus died, does that mean every single person in the world is going to heaven? No, some of them aren't going to take the chance. They're still going to do wrong. They're still going to be punished. So what should we do? Should I take that guy's life or should I let him take mine? Because if he takes mine, he might be saved one day. If I take his, he's going to hell. If he takes mine, where do I go? I just became a martyr for Christ. You don't think that's going to mean something to God? I get to go home. Peter wrote, finally, let all be humble, not returning evil for evil or abuse for abuse, but on the contrary, blessing. So if you get evil, you give blessing. What? Because in this you were called that you might inherit a blessing. For it is better, if the will of God wills, to suffer for doing right rather than doing wrong. Because Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order that he might bring us to God. Do we share in the sufferings of Christ? That's what Paul wanted to do. Right? Think about Paul for a minute. Think about how the Christians treated him. He's persecuting the church. What if some Christian guy had said, we got to get that guy. We got to take him out. He's having people put to death. He's dragging these families away. You think the world would be a better place if Saul had died? Saul of Tarsus had been killed by some valiant Christian warrior? Well, half the New Testament would be gone. Wouldn't even have it. What would we do? So we can see how much influence Jesus' teaching and way of life had on his apostles and that generation of Christians. If we go to the Didache, this is in the early 2nd century, about 100. He says, this is the way of life. First, you will love the God who made you. Second, your neighbor as yourself. In all things, whatever you want to be done to you, whatever you do not want to be done to you, do not do to another. You will not plan any evil against your neighbor. You will not hate any man, but some you will reprove. On some you will have mercy. For some you will pray, and some you will love above your own soul. You will not become liable to anger, for anger leads to murder. Nor jealous, nor contentious, nor passionate, for from all these things murders are born. Cain killed his brother. Why? Because of this? Because he was jealous? We're going to go a little bit further since we started a little bit late. There's a practical story in here from 200 AD by Clement of Alexandria about the Apostle John. So we don't know if this is a true story, you might say, but it's a story they were telling about John. And it gives us something of John's character, what to expect. And this story's in your outline on page 12. But John was visiting some Christians in a certain city. And in the church there was a young heathen man, right? Some young guy that had just come in, new convert kind of. And, John had a good feeling about him. He wasn't quite a convert yet. John said, take care of that guy. Told the elder there, take care of him. So, the bishop took him home, taught him, he baptized him, and then he thought, this is a good guy. And he neglected him. Left it alone, right? Thought he was safe. Well, some bad guys, no good kids from town came around, started encouraging him to do evil. Oh, let's go run away and do this thing and do that, right? Nobody watching out for him. He got caught up into evil ways. He committed some really great crime. And then they ran away into the mountains. And he became the leader of the gang. Right? Good grief. And he's committing all these acts of bloodshed and cruelty. And John comes back sometime later, visiting the city, and he hears about this kid. And his heart goes out to him. He gets a horse, he gets a guide, he goes out into the mountains to find his way to this guy's place. And when the boy sees John, he runs off in shame. And John says to him, "Why, my child, do you flee from me? Your own father, unarmed and old as I am, have mercy on me, my child. Fear not. You still have hope of life. I will give account of Christ. I will give account to Christ for you. If need be, I will willingly endure death for you, as the Lord endured it for us. I will give my life for yours. Stand, believe, Christ has sent me." And the young man stopped. He looked down, threw away his weapons. He started shaking and crying. John came up to him. The guy hugged him and started confessing his sins and weeping more and more. But John said, "Jesus forgives you." He fell on his knees. He kissed the hand that the kid was holding back in shame, maybe covered with blood. He led him back to the church. And he spent time with him praying, fasting, counseling him over and over again. He says he did not leave him until he had restored him to the church, a trophy of the visible resurrection. Right? You might say, that guy was a terrible guy. He had done some terrible things. He did deserve to die, but that's not what we do. Right? That's not what Jesus did. Well, we have opportunity. Let's do good. Ignatius writes to the Ephesians, on behalf of the rest of men, pray unceasingly. For there is in them a hope of repentance, that they may attain to God. Allow them, therefore, to become disciples, even through your works. Right? Pray for these men. There's a chance that they might repent. Why would we be killing people that might repent? That's the opposite of everything. Right? Now, God might do it. God might send someone to kill them because their time is up. But He's not sending us, because He sent us for something else. Ignatius says, toward their anger be gentle, toward their boasting be meek. Against their abuse set your prayers, against their error be firm in the faith. Against their savagery be mild, not being eager to imitate them. Now I said not everybody was doing what was right. There's one writer in this time that reproves his readers. He says, these Gentiles, they hear the words from our mouth, the words of God. They're impressed by the beauty and greatness. But then learning that our works are not worthy of the things that we say, they turn to abuse, saying this is some deceitful tale. When they hear from us that God says you will have no thanks if you love only those who love you, but you will have thanks if you love your enemies and those that hate you. But when they see that we do not love not only those who hate us, but even those who love us, they laugh, and the name is blasphemed. Right? We're supposed to be loving our enemies. But how often do we not even love our neighbor? Do we not even love our brother in the church? Right? How long are we biting and devouring each other? There's a problem in James. There's a problem in all these. It's not new to the church for this to happen, but it's not the way it should be. Right? It's an error. It's a terrible one. Justin said, we who hated and killed one another, and because of differences in customs, would not share a common hearth with those who were not of our tribe, now after the appearance of Christ have become sociable. We pray for our enemies. We try to persuade those who hate us unjustly, in order that they, living according to the good suggestions of Christ, may share our hope of attaining the same reward from the God who is master of all. Right? What was our old way? We hated each other. We killed each other. It's us and them. I'm not letting you eat with me. But now, I would really like you to hear this good news. I would really like you to be with me and with God forever. Justin said again, nor has God wished us to be imitators of the wicked, but He has told us by patience and gentleness to lead all men from the shame and lust of evil things. And this we are able to show in the case of many who were once on your side. Right? Again, he's writing to the emperors, or he's writing to some non-believers. He's saying they changed. They were violent. They were tyrannical. They conquered. Right? Well, they changed from that. And now they conquered either through seeing the consistency of their Christian neighbor's life, or having noticed the strange patience of fellow travelers when they were cheated, or having experienced it from those whom they've done business with. Okay? Have you heard any of those stories? Of someone who became interested in Christianity because they saw the way a Christian was living? I've never met anyone that does business like that. You're so respectable. You're so honest. Right? That guy over there just got cheated and robbed, but he took it in stride. He's happy. What? How does he do that? How is he not depressed? How is he not angry? Right? And people come to Christ. Clement of Alexandria says, above all, Christians are not allowed to correct by violence sinful wrongdoings. You done something wrong? We're not allowed to do violence. It's just not allowed. For it is not those who hold back from evil by compulsion, but those who hold back by choice that God crowns. For it is not possible for a man to be good constantly except by his own choice. Right? If you're only following the law because the cops are there watching you the whole time, you're not a good person. Right? If you have to be forced into doing it, that doesn't make you good. Right? That just makes you smart. Because there are some fools that would do it anyway. But if we're going to do good, we have to do it by our own choice. Tertullian refers to the command to love enemies and not retaliate. He reminds the pagans that Christians are willing to be slaughtered. We're not going to go to war because we follow the teaching that it's more lawful to be killed than to kill. So why would we go to war? No. That's not going to be what happens. Tertullian says a Christian does not even hurt his enemy. Right? If we love our enemy, can't hurt. He insists on obeying the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount in all cases. We've always got to do these things. It is absolutely forbidden to repay evil with evil. Right? This was the attitude of Christian thinkers 150 years after Jesus. He calls the Christian the son of peace, for whom it is not right even to go to law. I'm not even allowed to take you to court. Right? Now you might say, well, Paul appealed to Caesar. Yeah, but he wasn't trying to take anybody else to court. He was trying to get out of jail because he had been unjustly in prison for 2 years. And they weren't going to let him out. And we don't avenge our own wrongs. Origen in 240 says, the lawgiver of the Christians has forbidden the destruction of man. And so it is never right for one of his own disciples to fight against a man, however unrighteous he may be. If we're a follower of Jesus, we can't fight against anybody. It doesn't matter how bad they are. Why? Because God did not wish for his divine laws to allow the destruction of any man whatever. He talks about how the Jews, Origen was an interesting guy. He had a lot of philosophies. Not everything that he thought was right. He had some crazy ideas. But he's consistent with everybody else on these points. But he says, the Jews, if they had obeyed the gospel, they'd have to give up being soldiers. They'd have to give up punishing crime. They'd have to give up their nation. Right? They have a Jewish nation. You can't have a nation and be a Christian. That's what he's saying. You can't have a Christian nation because we're not allowed to do the things the nations have to do. Right? He says the time of the Jewish nation has passed. Right? God doesn't want a nation like that. That's why he destroyed their city. He destroyed their temple. And Christianity spread all over the world. He gives God all the credit for the safety and growth of Christianity. He says, but since it was the purpose of God that the nations should receive benefits from Christ's teaching, all the devices of men against Christians have been brought to nothing. No weapon fashioned against you will stand, right? For the more that kings and rulers and peoples have persecuted them everywhere, the more they have increased in number and grown in strength. Now we consider these statements of Origen. They're very important because they show, here's the middle of the 3rd century. This is over 200 years after Jesus. And these hard sayings of the Sermon on the Mount are still followed, right? This is still the only proper way to live as a Christian. And it shows that these sayings of Jesus, love your neighbor, turn the other cheek, don't go to court, all these things affect our feeling toward war. And there is a place for a sub-Christian ethical standard. You might say, what does that mean? That means that the gospel and the new covenant that Jesus gives is for his disciples. The rest of the world is not going to do that. They're going to follow their own standard. They're going to make their own laws. Right? God's going to hold them accountable. But they don't have to follow our laws. They're under no obligation. Right? They're going to rule the world as they see fit. Now maybe we can influence those standards. We can teach them about Christ. We can get them to step out of the world into a new kingdom. Right? But those laws all exist. God lets those authorities operate in the world. Just like He lets demonic powers go where we don't even see. Right? He lets men, evil men, do terrible things. And He uses them for good. Now, one very interesting part of this discussion, we're getting very close to the break time here, is that none of these writers make an exception for the defense of others. Right? We look at Tertullian, he kind of takes it for granted. If I'm not going to avenge my own wrongs, then I'm not going to avenge the wrongs done to somebody else. Right? If you're going to hurt me and I'm going to turn the other cheek, if you hurt them, I'm not going to shoot you. Right? I'm not going to run you through with a sword. Now, I might walk over there and put my cheek in the way so you can hit me instead of them. Right? You know, it's not about doing nothing, but I'm not going to avenge them. Right? Now, that idea, though, goes against the spirit of a lot of modern Christianity. Right? We look and we say, we got to defend the poor and the innocent. We got to defend the weak and the powerless. Right? There's a lot of guys that might say, look, I wouldn't go to war, but we've got to do something to help them. And they go to war to help them. Right? They compromise on that principle. And it's true, a Christian should always try to prevent others from being wronged. Right? But how do we do it? What's the right method? Is it a gentle moral appeal? We're just talking to them and telling them about the truth and getting them to understand these things? Or do we use violent physical coercion? Or something in between? Right? Does a mental moral appeal work if you have a threat of violent force right behind it? It's not quite the same. Right? And we got to keep in mind, there's a possibility of failure either way. Some people say, this is never going to work. They're not going to listen to you. You got to do something. You got to put a stop to that. Okay. Yeah. Trying to put a stop to it might work. Right? I've got a gun. What if I miss? Right? And they shoot me. And then. Right? What if they weren't really planning on hurting anybody? They just wanted to make a quick buck. Get in and get out. But I pull a gun on them and now they're afraid for their life. Right? Self-defense works both ways. Right? You shoot them, you don't kill them. They could get into court and be like, well, I wasn't actually going to hurt him. I just threatened him. Right? You might end up in jail. It's interesting. It works that way. We don't like to think about it that way, but that's how it is. Things can our physical action might escalate the situation. Right? And how do we know a gentle moral appeal won't work? Right? How do we know that they may have never heard anything like that? Never seen anybody just try to talk their way out of a situation kindly and softly and gently. They might just be totally shocked. You know, what about the power of God? Can we trust God in that situation? How many stories in the Bible do we need to have of God blinding all the bad guys so that the good guys can get away? Right? He's done it before. He could do it again. You can't say, well, God's not going to intervene. Well, if you're not willing to entrust it to God, you've got a bigger problem. But, you know, if we can't use violence to defend ourselves, then again, doesn't the golden rule say, well, I shouldn't use violence to defend anybody else? Right? I wouldn't want you to use violence to defend me. Right? Don't shoot the guy, let him go. Right? We'll pick up with this after the break.